So, Chapter 11, real estate contracts. In real estate, we're going to be dealing with not just, we need to learn contract law as well as real estate law of the state of New Jersey pertaining to contracts. And some of it is general contract law, and some things are specific to real estate. So in this chapter, chapter 11, real estate contracts are a big part of the business. So as you could imagine, many questions you'll get on exam from this chapter. So in this chapter, we're going to describe the essential elements of a valid contract, including the effects of the statute of frauds. We already know that statute of frauds, since we learned it and we heard it several times. Anytime we hear that, it usually has to deal with something having to be in writing. We're going to identify different types of contracts and issues that affect the validity of contracts. And we're going to explain various contracts used in the real estate business. So, what is a contract? Well, it's a voluntary agreement between legally competent parties to perform or refrain from performing some legal act supported by legal consideration in order for them to be valid. So, let's go ahead and let's take care of those highlights right now. And I'll do our notes for this next chapter here. Now, there are four essential elements for any contract in order to be valid. Four essential elements of a valid contract. This alone you need to know for exams. What are the four essential elements of any contract in order to be valid? What are the four essential elements of a valid contract?
Competent parties, offer acceptance, consideration, and legalities. Object.
Yep. So you need to study them, you need to memorize them, you need to know them. Those are the four essential elements for any contract to be valid. So let's write this next to the title. Let's first of all highlight, and then we'll write the number 4 there in front, and then we'll highlight just these titles, okay? And then this down here about the parole evidence rule. I got a little note that I added in here, because I know they didn't update these they didn't adjust these questions at the state level. And I've been telling the Real Estate Commission as well as PSI, they really need to update any questions they have in their database pertaining to minors being considered adults. But because the laws have changed in the state of New Jersey, but our politicians didn't update all the laws. So it still shows this certain written law that we're going to go over in a second, that married minors can be considered adults and can sell property and transfer the ownership of property. But the law has been updated that that minors can't be married in New Jersey, and under no circumstances, even with parental consent. It used to be that a minor can be married in New Jersey with parental consent as young as 16. And of course, with all the immigration and stuff, we got people coming from countries where it's okay for a 60-year-old man to marry an 8-year-old. That's just disgusting. That's child abuse. And so sometimes they try to stretch it here when they come to this country to make it legit. I don't know, people selling their own kids or whatever the hell it is that they're doing with human trafficking and whatnot. So New Jersey child right activists were on a mission to put a law in place. And, they seemed that Trump was doing it. This was during his first presidency. They seemed that he was doing this, and he was actually taking a major stance. This is something he really supported and had a charge on during his first presidency. I'm sure you never heard of it in the media, because I've never seen it in the media about this, but he was doing a lot to try to prevent human trafficking and child abuse and things of that nature. And he was trying to do the best that he could at federal level. And so he put together a lot of administrative orders because it was hard to get the Congress of the Democrats on his side to vote on the same issue, even though these were issues that everybody can agree on, that we should protect children, and there should not be human trafficking. But the thing is, they're so divisive there that, he's a Republican, they're a Democrat. There's no way that they'll agree to any legislation, because then if he does something good, then he'll get credit for it. And they don't want Republicans having credit for doing something good. So these people get nowhere with the law. So he just did it by administrative order, administrative rule. He put together presidential orders that made it a crime and criminal. They could be criminally charged for people who enabled sex trafficking and human trafficking, especially of minors. As a matter of fact, any of these websites, of community websites that also have like sections on them, the bulletin board systems and the what do they call them? The type of website where they have the classified ad type websites that also had sections there for dating or massage services and things of that nature. That if any of those were dealing with human trafficking or selling sex and stuff, which you could tell they were pretty blatant and obvious that they were. That they could be just as liable, those website owners can be just as liable and will be held criminally liable for dealing in the sex trafficking as those who are actually maybe kidnapping these children or forcing people into forced prostitution and stuff. So a lot of people don't know that this was actually happening, and he made these administrative rules. But of course, when Biden came in with the stroke of a pen, he undid every single Trump administrative rule without even reviewing it, just because, hey, orange man bad, right? So all the stuff, all of his things that he did were undone. And of course, human trafficking increased tremendously under President Obama. I'm sorry, President Biden. So these are things that we're trying to correct once again, now that he's president once again, but they really should pass laws on this stuff. And in New Jersey, we had some, like I said, an activist group in his first presidency there that actually got this passed under New Jersey law because it wasn't tied to the president, that under no circumstances ever can a minor be considered an adult, and therefore a minor cannot be married. So even though it used to be in the law. So there are some laws attached that are still out there that were not removed from the books pertaining to this, particularly 37-2-30, where it says minor spouses have the authority to join adult spouses in the transfer of their realty that they own. But the thing is, you can't be married and be a minor in New Jersey. But for exam purposes, they didn't change the exams because it still has references to this in the law. So the four essential elements of a valid contract, we got them all highlighted here.
Yeah.
Yeah, got it.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm going to go through them separately in my own notes. Okay, what the four essential elements of the valid contract are, instead of just the screenshots there. We're going to go over it in my own notes here. So we have competent parties. Why is this all getting bold? So competent parties. You have to be at least 18 years of age in New Jersey and of sound mind. So you got to be a sane, sober adult with no mental disease or defect. And you got to be legal age. That's 18 years of age or older. That's legal age, sound mind, sane, sober adults. If under 18, a contract can be voidable by the minor because they're not a competent party in the eyes of the law. So for exam purposes only, not in real life, because the laws have changed to protect minors, they're no longer allowed to get married, even with parental consent. So the law still has statutes on the books that say that married minors can sign contracts, even though the law does not allow them to be married anymore. So therefore, PSI has not changed the questions on their exams. So when can a minor be considered a competent party and when it comes to the signing of contracts? When they're married minors. Once again, it's for exam purposes only.
It's kind of confusing. Wait, so
In real life, yeah, married. If you're a minor. But on exams, when can a minor be considered a competent party? If they're married.
Could you repeat the first part because you cut off?
Sure. So let's go over the 4 essential elements of a valid contract once again. You have to have competent parties. So you have to be at least 18 years of age. You got to be at least 18 years old in New Jersey to be considered a competent party. So you got to be legal age. Okay. That's what legal age is. Let me grab that from this bullet point and the legal age, and I'll put that right here. You got to be of legal age. You have to be of sound mind. So sound mind, there's no mental disease or defect. You're sane, sober adult with no mental disease or defects. If you are under the age of 18, the contract is voidable because you're not a competent party, right? So you got to be at least 18 years of age or older to be legal age in New Jersey. If under 18, the contract is voidable by the minor because they're not considered a competent party. Sorry, I keep moving these notes around, trying to clarify this, make them a little bit neater here. You have to be of sound mind, sane, sober adult with no mental disease or defect. So for exam purposes only, not in real life, because the laws have changed to protect minors. They're no longer allowed to get married, even with parental consent. So the law still has a statute that says married minors can sign contracts, even though the law doesn't allow them to be married any longer, under any circumstances. So that's the part that people were getting a little confused about. All right. Don't be confused. Don't be confused. You're not allowed to get married if you're a minor in New Jersey. But for your exams, married minors are considered adults. So For exam purposes only, a minor under the age of 18 who is married would be considered an adult, and contracts they enter into would be legally binding. Got it? Everybody good? Questions?
Yes, I'm good.
No, we're good.
Okay. I don't know why all this text shrunk up on me from moving things around a little bit. Try to enlarge that. There we go. Better. So what are the four essential elements of a valid contract? Competent parties, offer and acceptance. Well, offer and acceptance, this is also known as mutual assent. It's when the parties are in agreement to all the terms of the contract. They're aware of and fully understand all the major key points of the contract. At that point, if they're in agreement on all of those terms, it's said that they've come to a meeting of the minds. So what is a meeting of the minds? It's when everybody's aware of, fully understands, and is in agreement on all the four essential elements of a valid contract. So they're aware of all the major key points of that contract, the things that are written in the contract, how much the offer's for, on all the, when's the closing date, how much is the financing is going to be cash versus a loan, any other terms that may have been written into the contract that the parties need to abide by. These are the all the major key points. And when the parties are in agreement and fully understand all the major key points of the contract, it's said that they've come to a meeting of the minds. Okay. Now let me copy everything from the slideshow I got here and put that in these notes that I've been trying to take here. Oh. Consideration. Something of value has to be given or received from each other in the exchange. It's the entire purchase price. So in order for any contract, whether it's a real estate contract or not, for any contract to be valid, the parties have to give and receive something from each other of that is of value. You guys ever watch any of the types of People's Court and things of that nature on TV? You know, you may come across a situation if you watch the judges and how they're ruling on things. They usually say that there has to be some sort of consideration exchanged in the party, in the agreement, in order for the court to be able to enforce it. You can't have a legally binding contract that is a one-sided agreement that only benefits one party to the contract. It has to, there has to be something given or received from both parties. It doesn't matter whether it's goods or services or it's a bartering, you know, legal tender, exchange of something of value, or love and affection. These are the three forms of legal consideration. So legal tender is money or a mortgage loan. Or you could have an exchange of something of value, whether it's goods or services. I'll give you this item in exchange for this item. Or I will do this for you if you give me that. That's like bartering, And then love and affection. Courts have determined and ruled that, gifts given to family members, the love that they hold for each other and the affection they hold for each other is considered valuable, good, valuable form of consideration. So therefore, it is considered a part of consideration. However, it should be accompanied by a letter stating that, in fact, it is a gift. Okay, so the consideration is the entire purchase price of what the parties give and receive from each other in that exchange. And then we have legality of the object or purpose of the contract. The contract must be legal. It may not involve an illegal purpose or substance, the object of the contract. So whatever you're selling or doing must be legal. Yeah, I got a great video. I don't think I uploaded it yet. I got to take a look and see. But I'm definitely going to add it to this slideshow. You guys ever watch Cops or Live PD on TV?
Yeah.
There was an old episode of Cops where a cop got flagged down by this lady on the side of the road. He was driving down the street. He got flagged down. He pulled over, seeing what's going on over here. She seemed pretty frantic. And the lady goes on to explain to her that she was trying to buy something from this lady, and she took her money. She ripped her off. And then she's like, I'm going to be honest with you. It was cocaine. It was cocaine. I gave her $20 for a rock, and she didn't give it to me. And the cop's just looking at her, and he's like, you for real? And she's like, yeah, she ripped me off. She gave me something else, some kind of powder or something. And now she's kicking me out of here. She won't give me my money back. I want you to get my money back. He's like, so you had a drug deal that went down, that went bad. She ripped you off for your $20. Am I reading you right? And she's like, yeah. And you want me to get the $20 back for you? The cop said, get the hell out of here. He's like, let me go over here and see what's going on with her. And he goes on to the lady, and she's like, no, I don't sell no drugs. She's like, I'm a respectable person. You could ask my son over here. I don't sell drugs, so I wasn't selling her no rock or nothing. She came over here all whacked out, thinking that I sell drugs. Gave me $20. She's like, listen, I'm a respectable person. I don't sell drugs. I'm a prostitute. I love that episode. That was a classic line. Anyway, the bottom line there is the cop cannot enforce that payment, that transaction, because the whole premise of it was illegal. She was trying to buy an illegal substance, illegal drugs, and then she wants the cop to enforce the law. You cannot enforce a law. It has to be for legal purpose or an object. So whatever you're doing, they can't enforce the law for prostitution. They can't enforce a law for a drug deal, to get that payment, because these are illegal acts or illegal objects that are being sold. So it must be for a legal object or purpose. So once again, four essential elements of a valid contract: competent parties, offer and acceptance, some form of legal consideration like legal tender, exchange of value, or love and affection. And no, they're not talking about prostitution. They're talking about a gift between relatives. The parent gives the child something. In exchange, they just have love and affection for each other. Or legality of the object or purpose of the contract, right? So those are the four essential elements of a valid contract, which you need to know. You also need to know the three legal forms of consideration, which are legal tender, exchange of value, and love and affection. Is anybody confused on any of this? When can a minor be considered an adult and a competent party?
If the minor is married,
Yeah.
already married.
If they're a married minor, correct. But in real life, can a minor get married?
16?
No.
A minor
no.
cannot get married.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so, but for exam purposes and exam purposes, only, when can a contract with a minor be enforceable? If they're a married minor. Okay, I know it sounds ridiculous because you can't be married if you're a minor, but that's the correct answer for exams. Okay. 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 Copy all these things down to the notes. And then we have the legal. Gotcha. All right, now the parole evidence rule. A valid contract may be oral or written. It can be verbal or written. That's just general contract law. General contract law says that contracts can be verbal or they could be in writing, and they can be enforceable in a court of law. However, it's kind of hard to enforce a verbal contract. How do you prove all the details of the terms of the contract? Unless you have witnesses, right? It becomes kind of complicated. So generally speaking, contracts can be in the eyes of the laws and the courts, verbal contracts can be legal, just not for the sale of real estate. The law specifically says that here in New Jersey. Now, the parole evidence rule states that when you have somebody who has a contract in writing and another one has a verbal contract, the courts will dismiss the one that has the verbal agreement in favor of the one who has evidence. They have it in writing. That's what the parole evidence rule is. They will throw out any oral agreements and rule in favor of the person who has the contract in writing because they have proof, they have evidence. That's what the parole evidence rule is about. Okay? And that's just some general contract law concept. So parole evidence rule, definitely add that to your list. So we also highlighted in the book here on, oh, I don't have the page number on this one. Was that page 196? Parole evidence rule? Yes.
Yeah.
Page 196. Let's get this page number, copy it over to this slide as well. Amendments and addenda. Before we ever look at the definitions, let's just look at the words themselves. The word amendment has the word mend in it. What does mend mean? To mend something? To mend it?
To put
Fix.
together.
To fix it. So you're making a change. You're fixing something. So the word amendment means to fix or change a contract, to make changes to a contract. Whereas the word addenda has the word add in it. You're adding something to the contract. an additional page, for instance. So look, we could already figure out what these words mean without even reading the definition, just by the word mend being in it. You already know what the word mend means, and the word addenda has the word add in it, so you're adding something to a contract, and that's all it is. It's as simple as that. So amendments and addenda, that's what it is. What it is. Amendment is changes to a contract, and addenda is an addition to a contract. So anytime a contract is modified, those changes must be agreed to in writing by all the parties involved. And they need to sign or initial next to each and every change that you make to a contract. Otherwise, the contract was just voided. Now, licensees must not make any changes or additions to the contract after both parties have already signed it. This would be the unauthorized practice of law without a license. All right. So this would be the unauthorized practice of law without a license. Okay, so an amendment is a change to the contract, and any change voids the contract unless both parties initial next to those changes agreeing to the modification. And we could do that when we're doing contract negotiations back and forth. Okay? When we're involved in contract negotiations, before both parties sign it, one may have signed a contract and the other didn't sign it yet. So we can make changes to it still. We just can't make changes to it once both parties signed the contract. But if only one party signed the contract, we can. An addendum is anytime something is added to the contract. It must be done before both parties sign it as well. Otherwise, we're practicing law without a license again. We can add things to a contract if we forgot to add before, then and both parties already signed the contract. We could ask the attorneys to make any changes or additions to it while it's in attorney review. Then we could still make those changes, just we can't do it. We'd need an attorney to do it. Okay. So what I wrote, do these highlights on page 196, and right over here, this is basically what I got typed here is what I wrote here on the side. That licensees must not make any changes or addition to a contract after both parties signed it. This is practicing law without a license. If only one party signed and there is a change, all parties must initial next to each modification. It's not considered agreed upon until both parties signed it. You got to get it in writing. Remember, if you make a change to a contract and then the other person signs it, you can't submit it to the attorneys as if it was already signed and agreed to. Even though the other party may have agreed to it, you still need them to initial or sign next to each and every place where there was a modification made on the contract. Let me know when you guys got all this. just so I could dictate if you're writing that note there and aside, licensees must not make any changes or additions to the contract after both parties signed it. This is practicing law without a license. If only one party signed and there's a change, all parties must initial next to each modification. Has everybody got those notes? Or is somebody still writing?
Got it.
Good.
So the rec rule for commissions. Real estate licensees follow both contract law as well as real estate licensing law. And the rec rules state that to be entitled to a commission, a real estate broker cannot be paid unless they have some sort of authorization in writing by a client or customer to be entitled to earn a commission. Those authorizations can be a brokerage service agreement, the BSA, listing agreement, exclusive buyer's agency agreement, designated agency agreement, a transaction brokerage agreement, or a referral agreement. Now, even though referral agreements are signed by the two brokerages, not the consumer. So it has to be signed by the consumer. And anytime we sign a contract with a consumer, we must give them a duplicate original immediately. This applies to sale or lease contracts, no matter who the broker is working for, on behalf of the seller, the buyer, the landlord, or the tenant. So to be entitled to that commission, they have to hire you, number one. Ooh. The statute of frauds states that sales contracts for real estate must always be in writing. Leases must be in writing if they're 3 or more years in length. However, if a licensee is involved, it must always be in writing no matter the length. Because we as real estate licensees, we need to, we got to follow the real estate commission's rules. And the real estate commission rules say that we're not entitled to a commission unless we have some sort of authorization in writing to act on behalf of the owner. So if you're not hired, well, let me see. How do we word this? So if you're a real estate licensee, if the owner's not using a real estate licensee, if they're selling on their own, or they're using a real estate licensee, the contract for sale of real estate must always be in writing. However, if they're leasing a property on their own, no real estate agent involved, it doesn't matter. They can have a lease as long as it's not 3 or more years, and it can be just verbal. But if it's 3 or more years, it must be in writing according to the law. And then leases can be added, they can be recorded in the public record if they're 2 or more years in length. So it's extremely risky on relying on oral agreements for contracts. Because how do you prove what the parties agreed to? Right? Witnesses? Drama. Get it in writing always. And remember, real estate licensees, we don't just follow real estate law, the New Jersey statutes, Title 45, Chapter 15. We also follow the Real Estate Commission's Administrative Code, Title 11, Chapter 5, that states we must always have contracts for sale or leases in writing, and licensees must never have verbal contracts. We can never have a verbal agreement. The general public, they can, but we can't. But for the contract for the sale of real estate, it doesn't matter if the person's using a real estate licensee or not. It must always be in writing. So we need to know for exams. Contracts for real estate always need to be in writing for the sale of real estate. Leases only need to be in writing if they're 3 or more years in length, unless a real estate licensee is involved, then it doesn't matter the length. And leases, if they're 2 or more years, they can be recorded in a public record. Everybody got that?
Yeah.
So, New Jersey Statute of Frauds states that a contract for the sale of real estate and any lease for more than 3 years must be in writing and signed in order to be enforceable. And then just right there at the end of that, leases longer than 2 years can be recorded. That's what we'll actually have it noted in the book. So we just learned about the parole evidence rule, right? What does that say? That says that if you got 2 people, one person has a contract in writing and the other has a verbal agreement, the court will dismiss the verbal agreement in favor of the one who has evidence, the parole evidence rule. They got the contract in writing. Statute of Frauds requires that all contracts for the sale of real estate be in writing, and if it's a lease, it only needs to be in writing if it's 3 or more years, if a real estate agent's not involved. Because it doesn't matter the length of time, real estate agents always have to have it in writing to be entitled to a commission. And if their leases are 2 or more years in length, they can be recorded in a public record. So somebody can record their long-term lease interest in someone else's property in the public record. All right, now contracts can be express or implied, unilateral or bilateral, executory or executed, valid, unenforceable, voidable, or void. You guys ever hear these terms before in your life? Some of them may sound familiar. All right, well, we're going to go over them right now so you can know what they mean. Everybody can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You guys just be very quiet when I'm asking you questions and wondering if you're hearing me. All right. So let's do the highlights here first, and then we'll go to the next slide where I'll have all of the explanations here in my own verbiage. So here, you guys do all these highlights and underlines right now. And let me know when you're done.
I'm good.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
good too.
I need another minute, please. Okay, done.
okay. So an express contract lays out all the terms expressing those terms in words, leaving nothing to interpretation. That's how we usually express ourselves, with our words rather than our actions. Because if you express yourself by your actions, it can leave some things to interpretation. But verbally, whether it's verbally or in writing, we express ourselves in words. When we do that on contracts, that's usually in writing. So express contracts lays out all the terms, expressing them in words, leaving nothing to interpretation, and those words are usually in writing. Whereas an implied contract is one that is created by one's actions rather than their words. It is demonstrated by the acts and conduct rather than in words. Therefore, it may leave some things to interpretation and cause confusion. Some examples of an implied contract would be a lease that expired, but then the landlord still accepts the rental payment from the tenant. So therefore, now they would have no contract in writing, but the actions of the landlord accepting the payment from the tenant creates an implied contract that they're okay with the tenant remaining there, even though they no longer have a contract in writing, right? The actions of the landlord accepting that rental check, that payment from the tenant, says that the tenant, in the eyes of the law, says that the landlord is okay with the tenant remaining as a month-to-month tenant there now. Here's another example. If a bank accepts a payment from an owner after the foreclosure process begins, this would be interpreted by the courts that there's some sort of an agreement between the lender and the owner for an alternate form of payment, especially if if that's what the owner says, that they have some sort of an agreement with the bank, and then they could prove that they made a payment to the bank and the bank actually accepted a payment from them after they started the foreclosure process. This would be interpreted as an implied contract, that it's possible and that there could be some sort of an agreement in place that the owner is making payments to the bank for that outstanding balance to get caught up. So if that were the case, a judge would throw that foreclosure out of the court because it seems like there could be an implied contract. And the lender would have to start that foreclosure process all over again and not accept any further payments. You guys understand that or have any questions on that, or pretty straightforward? Know
It's
that
straightforward.
express contracts are expressed in words and they're put in writing. Implied contracts, those are expressed by your. It's kind of like, you know, you go to McDonald's, you go to the drive-through, you pull up to the drive-through and you place an order at the box there, right? It's implied that since you place the order, that you're going to pay for the food, right? Same thing when you walk into a barber shop or a beauty salon to get your haircut. That you go in there, you sit in the chair to get your haircut. It's implied that your actions sitting in that chair to get your haircut or done, your hairdo done or whatever, that it's implied that you're going to pay for those services. You know, it's actually a felony, by the way. Let me just throw that out there. When it comes to services and you don't already have a relationship with the business, if you just go in there to get your hair cut and then you don't pay, you just walk out without paying, you know that's a felony. If they call the cops on you, that's actually a felony. It's a felony theft charge. It's called theft of services. A unilateral contract is a one-sided agreement or promise. Uni meaning one. So a unilateral contract is a contract where one party is required to do something, but only if the other party acts. But they're not required to. They have an option. Now, any contract where one party has an obligation to perform and the other has an option to is an option agreement. And option agreements must be prepared by attorneys. We cannot prepare contracts or agreements. An example of this would be a lease with an option to buy. Remember, I told you any contract has to have legal consideration, an exchange of something of value. So if you have a lease, that's a contract in itself. The lease agreement, the landlord's letting the premises and you're going to pay them for that. The option to buy, that's a different contract. It may even be included within the lease agreement, but it's really a separate contract. An option to buy. Do you have to buy if you have an option to buy?
No.
No, you did not. But you need to, because it's a contract, what are you giving the seller to reserve that option to buy? It may be paying a higher rent. But if that's the case, what if you don't exercise your option to buy later? Do you get that money back? Or if you do exercise your option to buy, how is it applied? Does it go towards the purchase price, or is it just the money that you reserve for that, reserving that option? See, devil's in the details. Attorneys need to draw this up. Attorneys would know what would be legal and what would not be legal to do. So this is why we cannot prepare those contracts. We're not experts in contract making, that in general contract law. We're not experts in the law. Let's just leave it at that. This is why these option agreements must be prepared by attorneys. So a bilateral contract, however, bi meaning two, both parties are required to do something. So in a unilateral contract, it's a one-sided agreement or promise. One party is required to do something, but only if the other acts. They have an option to. They don't need to. So the litmus test to determine whether it is an option contract or not is I will do this if you will do that. If that statement applies to your situation, it's a unilateral contract, an option agreement. I will do this if you will do that. Another example of that would be a law enforcement agency offers a monetary reward if you help aid in the capture of a criminal, and it leads to their conviction. Are you required to aid law enforcement in their capture of that criminal? No, but if you want to get paid that reward, you do. Now, a bilateral contract, these are required to do something. And the litmus test for that is I will do this and you will do that. So both parties are required to do something. So you can have a lease with an option to buy, or there's another thing called a lease purchase agreement. A lease purchase is you're leasing the property and you're definitely going to purchase it at a predetermined time, by a predetermined deadline in the future at a predetermined agreed upon price. Whereas the option agreement, you're definitely leasing the property and you have the option to buy it by a predetermined deadline at a predetermined price. One gives you the option, the other, you're definitely going to do it. That's where the difference lies. So one may be a unilateral contract and the other is bilateral. Contracts can be executed or executory. Let me get to that point. Executed and executory. So an executed contract is just one that is signed. Fully executed could have two definitions. It could be it's a contract that's been signed by all the parties. It's been fully executed, fully signed. Or it could be relating to the status of the contract, where all the terms of the contract have been fully performed and carried out, and there's nothing left to be done. It has been fully performed. It's been fully executed. So that's the two definitions of a fully executed contract. So executed is a contract that's been signed. A fully executed contract is one that's been signed by everybody. Or it could be related to the status of the contract, that all the terms of the contract have been performed and there's nothing left to be done. It's been fully executed. Executory is dealing with the status of a contract. Tory meaning still in progress. So all the terms of the contract have not yet been fully performed and carried out. There's still some things that need to be done. So let me put it to you in a situation. My client just executed the contract. We're going to send it over to you so your client can execute it. Let me know when we have a fully executed contract. Now, once they call me up and they say, okay, my client executed the contract, we now have a fully executed contract. What does that mean?
Both the parties sign the contract and it's done.
Oh, well, it's not done, but both parties have signed the contract. Now we need to do everything. So they agreed upon the terms of the contract. Now we got to do everything that the contract required them to do. So it's not done yet. So the status of that contract after it's been signed by everybody and fully executed in that regard, it is now in executory status. We still need to perform the contract and carry out all the terms of the contract. And then once we have done that, and then we close on the deal, it's been fully executed. You follow?
So is there a name when the contract is signed that both parties signed it? It's
Yeah.
not called execute. It's called executory, I guess.
It's fully executed. When both parties signed the contract, it's been fully executed.
Yeah,
But
but
the-
they didn't yet do the contract.
So it's in executory status
Oh, I see. Okay.
until they perform all that the contract required of them, and then it's fully executed once again as far as the status goes, not as far as the signature goes. See, that's why I said fully executed could have two meanings to it. Are you talking about the signature or are you talking about the status? Don't worry about it too much. I doubt they're going to give you the term executory on exams, even though we teach it and it's in the books and everything. I have never seen this word. I have never heard anybody use it other than teaching these classes. And when I went to school, never seen it on an exam, never heard anybody ever use it. Maybe an attorney does in law school or when they're talking about other attorneys and they're trying to sound all smart. But I've never heard an attorney even use this term, executory. Okay, but the term executed, we use it all the time. We got a fully executed contract yet or what? You know, hey, did your client to execute the contract? Did they sign it? Boom. We use that all the time. Okay, so in books, here on page 197 and 198, they split it through the pages here. We're talking about the status of the contract here. And then over here, we're talking about it being executed, pertaining to it being signed. An executed contract can be a signed contract. A fully executed would be one that's been signed by all parties. Let's just highlight that, because that's probably the extent that you need to know for exams. And for real life, for that matter. Good.
I got it.
Okie dokie. So, validity of contracts. Contracts can be valid, void. Wait, here. Contracts can be valid, voidable, unenforceable, and void. You guys all heard the terminology in your lives before, right? Before you ever took a real estate class. You heard those terms before, right? Or wrong, maybe?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, these are all terms that are here in everyday life at some point. Maybe
Yes.
not, but we've heard them before. So what is a valid contract? A valid contract is one that has all the essential elements to it that make it legally enforceable. What were the 4 essential elements of a real estate contract to make it valid? Actually, any contract, really. What are the 4 essential elements of any contract to be valid? See if you remember. It's not on this page. Here, I'll start you out. Any parties.
Consideration.
Okay, that's one of them. We're not doing it here, but okay, that's.
Oh.
For an acceptance?
I'm sorry. You guys stepped over each other there.
Offer and acceptance?
Offer and acceptance.
Love and affection.
That's one of the legal forms of consideration.
Legality of object or purpose.
The legality of the object or purpose of the contract. So here, to learn it in order, you got to have competent parties. You got to be of legal age and sound mind to enter into a contract. Somebody has to make you an offer, and you'd have had to have accepted it. And there has to be some kind of exchange of something of value. We call that consideration. And then the purpose of that contract has to be for a legal purpose or whatever, or if it's an object that's being sold, the contract has to be for a legal object, right? So a valid contract is one, here we go, that contains all essential elements. Avoidable contract is one that seems on the surface to be valid, but could be rescinded or disaffirmed by one of the parties. And then highlight a contract entered into with a minor is usually voidable. I'll give you a better rundown and description on the next slide about all the different statuses of a contract there. So here, this isn't necessarily types of contracts, but this is validity of contracts. Let me know when you guys have all the highlights. Okay, I assume you do by now. Okay, so validity of contracts pertains to the legal status of them. A valid contract meets all the legal requirements to be enforceable. It meets the four essential, it has the four essential elements. Okay? Here, we'll even add that in there. It contains the four essential elements to be legally enforceable. I guess that's kind of repeating itself or being redundant. It contains the four essential elements. A voidable contract is one that can be disaffirmed by one of the parties. It could be missing one of the essential elements. Essential elements could be canceled for some reason. Some examples of this would be a contract with a minor. You cannot enter into a legally binding contract with a minor, can you?
No, unless they're married for
Un-
exam purposes.
Unless they're married, for exam purposes only. Yes, very good. One party is under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Both of them, one or both parties are under the influence of drugs or alcohol. You can't have a legally binding contract with a couple of people who are high or drunk. They're not of sound mind. One party's not of sound mind, simply. There you go. They have some sort of mental disease or defects, or are under the influence. So they're under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Department of being sound mind. Yeah, there you go. And undue influence means they're being taken advantage of, or duress means they're force, or using force or intimidation. Yeah, those contracts can be voided. They're voidable. Because you either were not of legal age, contract with a minor, child, not of legal age, therefore they're not a competent party. There we go. That's good. Dooby-dooby-doo. All right, so an unenforceable contract, neither party can sue to force performance. However, if they both want to, they could remain in the contract. This would be known as valid between the parties. So an example of an unenforceable contract would be a contract between two people. Let's just say they're both drunk. Both of them are drunk. Oh, buddy, yeah, we're both kind of drunk. And we had a conversation, I don't even know out of Jersey. And like, I kind of like your house. I'd buy your house. How much are you asking for it? I'd buy your house. So we enter into a contract with each other that you're going to sell me your house and I'm going to buy yours. You cannot enforce that in a court of law because we were both smashed at the time, right? We're not competent parties. However, if when we both sober and you still want to sell and I still want to buy, we can still carry out the terms of the contract that we signed. This is known as valid between the parties. However, if one of us violates the terms of the contract, you can't sue, neither party can sue each other, forcing them to carry out the terms or for breaching the contract because it wasn't a valid contract to begin with. It's unenforceable. Now, a void contract is kind of a contradictory term because a void contract isn't a contract at all. It's a contract that either has been deemed illegal for one reason or another, or it is one that is missing one of the essential elements. So therefore, it cannot be legally enforced in the court of law. If it was a contract that was voided, it is now void. It's a canceled contract. So it's a contradictory term because a void contract is not a contract at all. It cannot be enforced by either party because it has already been canceled. It is illegal to begin with because it is missing one of the essential elements. There we go. Under influence means you're being taken advantage of. You got to use extreme caution when dealing with elderly people or those who may be under the influence of drugs or alcohol, or be aware of possible mental diseases or defects, Alzheimer's, dementia, insanity, bipolar, or some other illness. Now, how do we know? We're not their doctor, right? Do the highlight here. Under duress means force. Under influence means being taken advantage of. Do that highlight on page 198. Be respectful of your elders when dealing with older people selling homes. Be respectful of your elders, but pay attention at the same token. Yeah, I've had issues before when I went in, I got a listing. I met with an older lady. She seems like she was sharp as a tack. Got a listing from her. She was interviewing several brokers. I got the listing. She wanted to sell her house. A couple days later, I get a call from somebody who says that she's her daughter. She said, I visited my mom, went to her house. She had all this paperwork from real estate agents all over the place. I asked her what was going on. She said she was selling her house and she listed it with you. She said, my mom's not selling her house. My mom's got dementia or Alzheimer's. I forget which one it was. It was one of those, Alzheimer's or dementia. And she said, I'm a legal guardian, so we're not selling the house. I need to sign the contract. And I was like, okay, what should I do at this point? You tell me. What should I do at this point? Can I be in a contract? Can I have a listing like this?
No, because she's not of sound
No.
mind.
How do you know? Because some anonymous person called me on the phone, said it was her daughter, and said that she's not of sound mind. So you're going to take this person's word, or you're going to ask them to come in with some kind of proof or evidence? Because the lady seemed pretty sharp when I met with her. I got to keep looking out for my client's best interest. It very well may be the daughter, but the daughter knows her mom's kind of old and getting up there. And when her mom dies, she doesn't. She wants to get the house. She doesn't want her mom selling it off. Perhaps. Maybe she's not her mom's legal guardian. Maybe her mom does or does not have dementia. I don't know. If she does have dementia, are you her legal guardian? You got to prove it. Were you appointed by the court or somebody to be her legal guardian? That you have to sign on all matters and for them to be valid? Show me the paperwork. So I told her, I said, okay, no problem. Come on down with paperwork showing that you've been appointed her legal guardian, and I'll have you sign the form to cancel the listing. And so the lady came down. She actually did have the paperwork, and we had to cancel the listing. Now, the lady seemed like she was sharp as a tack, but apparently she may not know what year it is. So sometimes these mental diseases do act like this. Sometimes they're obvious, sometimes not so much. I had another case where I had a gentleman was getting a listing, and he was very shaky with his hands and stuff. But hey, older people can sometimes be like that, you know, shaky. They got some kinds of sicknesses or illnesses or whatever. You know, he was hunting for his words a little bit too. So, you know, I asked him. I said, "Are we the only ones that need to be signing contracts here today, or is there anybody else that needs to sign these contracts with us?" And he's like, "Oh, thanks for reminding me." He's like, "My son." He's like, "I got to call him. He lives right around the corner. Give me a second. Let me get him on the phone. He just lives right around the corner. He'll be right here." He's like, "Oh, you know how it is." He's like, when you're young, you take care of them, and you know, they have to look out for you." And I was like, "I understand. I understand." And that was the case. Good thing I jarred his memory. Now, he could have dementia or Alzheimer's, and I could have said that, and he could have still said no and not even remembered himself, you know, but I said it, I jarred his memory. He called his son, and his son came and signed the contracts too, which he totally forgot about, you know, but I jarred his memory, and he came, and it ended up being a listing, and I ended up selling the guy's property. So I started using this as my regular way of doing business when I'm dealing with older folks, you know, because you never know what's going on. You can't look at somebody and tell what's going on in here, but you try to be respectful of them. So I try to do that same line. I try to say, is there anybody else that needs to be signing contracts with us here today? Even though I looked up the list, tax records, and I know who is listed as the owner, but I ask, is there anybody else that needs to be signing contracts here with us today? Maybe to try to jar that memory. And when I did it for this one lady once, she was like, "What are you trying to say?" Well, I'm trying to see if there's anybody else that needs to sign contracts with us here today. Or are you just the only person that we need to sign contracts with? And she looked at me like, uh-huh. And she's like, okay. She caught me. She caught me. But I was being respectful, you know, so it didn't go any further than that, you know. But, you know, sometimes you don't know. You don't know what's going on in people's heads. All right, so additional contractual issues are coming up. Performance of a contract and the dates are merely guidelines to follow. We're going to learn about the phrase "time is of the essence." We're going to learn about different ways to discharge a contract. And we're going to learn the term default or breach of contract and what they mean. And we're going to learn about statute of limitations. So without further ado, here we go. Statute of limitations. is a time limit in which one has a right to assert their legal rights. That's what a statute of limitations are in the law. Statute of limitation. It's a time limit in which one has a right to assert their legal rights. There's a 6-year statute of limitations for foreclosures, mortgages, and cases of fraud. And a 10-year statute of limitations in New Jersey for lawsuits to recover real property. Remember, brokers are required to keep all records for 6 years, except for expired listings and unaccepted offers, which must only be kept for 6 months. You think that may have something to do with the statute of limitations, or is that just a coinkydink? What do you think? Think that much, huh? Okay, great. Nice talking to y'all. Oh, Lordy. Stay with me, people. Stay with me. Get those highlights. And get that poll. And get that poll. So everybody get those highlights?
Got it.
Who are we missing on the poll there? Somebody not paying attention? Wakey, wakey. Wake up. Hello? Wakey, wakey. Somebody wants to get credit for today. Answer that poll.
I'm done.
Well, somebody isn't. I'm trying to address the person. who answered.
Everyone can say yes, I done.
Yeah. But well, I know who it is. I have to run a report and I can see who's answering polls and who's not. But as of right now, somebody's not. So let me just stop that. You'll let it go for a minute usually, and then that's it. All right. So breach of contract or defaults. So we're talking about performance of a contract now. Breach of contract and defaults. So breach of contract is when someone breaks a contractual agreement without having a good legal excuse to do so. They could be held legally and financially liable to the other party. Dates in contracts are merely guidelines, and nobody would be considered in breach of contract if a date is missed to perform some that were stated in the contract. Time is of the essence. This is a term that relates to a strict deadline that must be met. And any party who has not performed on time is guilty of breach of contract if they missed the deadline to do something. The use of this term should be strictly left to attorneys, as it could be a double-edged sword because it does cut both ways. We usually use this. I mean, it can be used for many things, but we usually use it most commonly when a buyer is supposed to produce a mortgage commitment letter by a certain time. And they don't. So I reach out to the other side and ask them, hey, real estate agent for Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, you're supposed to produce the mortgage commitment letter by now. I haven't seen it. Do you got it? Can you send it to me? Or is there a problem? No, the mortgage rep didn't send it to me yet. Let me reach out to them and see. I was like, okay. Get it to me as soon as possible, please.
What can be a good legal excuse?
They forgot. Oh, what, for breaching a contract?
Yeah.
You lost your job and can't qualify for the mortgage loan anymore?
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You wouldn't be considered to be in default. But then again, we have subject to clauses in our contracts, these contingencies that basically state that if I'm unable to get a loan to buy your house and I don't follow through with the contract due to that reason, I cannot be held in breach of contract. So we go out of our way to make sure that we state things like that. Okay, so that's a good legal excuse, right? I lost my job, can't afford it.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Right. That's just one. I guess there could be many others, but that's usually the one main one we come across. But not just I changed my mind. That's not a good legal excuse.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So.
Okay. But there are times where we want those strict deadlines to be met, and time is of the essence order should be issued, but we should leave that to attorneys to do. And we usually do that, like I was saying. The buyer's agent should have produced the mortgage commitment letter by now. Mortgage commitment letter is when their lender has reviewed all the financials of information and committed to giving the buyer the loan. They've reviewed all the buyer's finances as well as the property information. And now they're committing to definitely giving the loan to buy this house. So they'll issue a mortgage commitment letter. But I didn't get it yet. So I reach out to the other side and I tell them, hey, listen, I need to get this commitment letter. You don't have it yet. Is there a problem? No, I need to reach out to the mortgage rep. Okay, reach out to the mortgage rep. Couple days go by. Hey, mortgage commitment letter. Oh, let me check on that again. Well, you were checking on it before. What happened? Oh, reach out to the mortgage rep. You have to get. Okay, all right. Couple more days go by. Dude, come on. This is ridiculous. Where's that mortgage commitment letter? Are they having trouble getting the mortgage loan? What's going on? Do we need to kill this deal? So at this point, I'm going to reach out to the attorney, the seller's attorney, because that's my client in this instance. So I'm going to say, hey, seller's attorney, I've been reaching out to the buyer's agent. They still have not produced the mortgage commitment letter. I need you to issue a time of the essence order because I'm getting the feeling they're jerking me around here. And so the attorney will send out this letter with a strict deadline that they need to produce that mortgage commitment letter by. Otherwise, the contract will automatically be killed. Keep in mind, it's a strict deadline. And if that deadline comes and they still did not produce the mortgage commitment letter by then, the deal is dead. Put the property back on the market. No further things need to be said. The deadline's come and gone. They're in breach of contract. Now, the next day, the next morning, they reach out and say, I got the commitment letter. Contract's already killed. Can they put it back together? Yes, they can. Do they have to? No, they don't. So now the buyer may think that they have a little bit of, what do you call it? They got a little bit of an advantage here. So they may think a little bit of leverage, They may think that, hey, wait a minute. The seller killed the deal, so they could either put the property back on the market, wait for another buyer to come around and start the attorney review process all over again and or they could just piece the deal back together with me. And you know what? We pieced the deal back together, but remember we had an inspection and they didn't want to do some work that we wanted them to do. So we could ask them to do that work as a contingency for us to put the deal back together. You know, see, that's a double-edged sword that cuts both ways there. You got to be careful of that. Okay. Everybody got that? Time is of the, yes.
So time is of the essence. It's like a physical document. It's not just like a phrase that
It is a
attributes you.
phrase, but it will be put in writing.
Oh, okay.
But we need to know what it is. A strict deadline that must be met, otherwise the parties are considered to be in breach of contract. That is, time is of the essence. It means time is very important. It's of the essence.
Got it?
Got it.
I got it.
Okay. So assignment and novation. So assignment and assuming a contract. Hold on 1 second. Okay, so assignment and assumption. Assuming a contract means you're taking over someone's duties of that contract. So when one party assigns their contractual obligations to someone else to take them over, but is never relieved of their obligation, they always hold primary responsibility in the event the assignee breaches the contract. An example of this would be a sublease, where the new tenant doesn't pay the rent, so the original tenant's still liable for the rent if that tenant you were subletting to does not pay the rent. So the original person who signed the lease is never relieved of that obligation to make sure that the rent is paid. Now, most leases have a clause in them saying that you cannot sublet. But if the landlord were to allow it, you're never relieved of your obligation to make sure that that rent is paid. So, for example, subleasing, you're renting from me, but then you want to buy a house, you start searching, you find the perfect house, you put it under contract, you ask me as the landlord if it's okay if you could sublet to someone else to rent because you just bought a new house and you want to move into that and you still got time on the lease and you won't let me out of the lease. So I could say yes. I don't have to. I could just say, hey, no, you're responsible for paying the rent. I want you. I don't want to deal with anybody else. Yeah, it's a headache. I would just say I'm a nice guy. I say, sure, okay. But then that new tenant that you get in there to sublet for the remainder of your lease term, and they're not paying the rent, you're still liable for the rent. That's what assignment is. Okay, now novation is a way you could replace that lease contract as an example in that same argument, that same example. You could formally replace a person named in a lease. That's known as novation of the parties. Or you can replace the contract with an entirely new one. That's just simply novation. Novation is replacing an existing contract with a new agreement. So the original agreement has no further legal force because it was completely replaced by a new one. novation of the parties is a way that you could keep the same contract in there, but you're just replacing the people that are named in the contracts. So the original person originally named in the contract has no further legal responsibility. That's called novation of the parties. So novation is substituting one contract for another, where the old contract is no longer valid. It was novated, replaced by another one. Or novation of the parties is we're just formally replacing, we're keeping the same contract in place, we're just replacing the person named in the contract. Okay.
Is this called like flipping a contract? Like I know that it was a common thing by COVID, let's say, that people were signing contracts onto like, certain homes that were going to close, a little later on. And then they basically sold the contract out to somebody else and they just like swapped out the names.
No. That's something that wannabe investors who don't have money do. And if I find out that's going on, I protect my clients and we don't get involved in them. Because usually if a real estate agent's involved in that, they have to convince their client to agree to this stuff.
Is that legal? Is it a legal act or no?
Kind of gray. If you're a real estate agent and you're convinced your clients to sign this contract, it gives somebody that authority to be able to do that. You're not looking out for your client's best interest at all. You're violating your fiduciary duties to your client.
Right, yeah. No, definitely.
But is it legal for that other person to do this? Yeah. Should it be? It depends, because some ethics can really be thrown out the window depending on the person you're dealing with.
Right. So like if it's like very short term, then like, yeah, I hear that it's not ethical. But let's say somebody like signed in a house that's new construction and 3 years down the line, they're like, oh, forget it, we're not moving there. And, we want to pull out of the contract, right? So can they give it over to someone else technically?
That's fine. They're in breach of contract. The builder will sue them and they'll get someone else to buy it. They don't need a third party in there. That's the purpose of the real estate agent. This is a third party who's unlicensed, who's trying to step in there and earn a commission, but yet they're trying to get the owner to sign away their rights to determine which contracts that they can accept. Instead, they're going to put it on this third party who will hold out for a contract for a higher amount because they're going to earn a commission on that, but they don't call it a commission. They're going to earn money on it, so they may not accept an offer that may have been acceptable, but they're not going to accept it because it's not going to pay out enough money. And if this is a case where we have a possible short sale or foreclosure and an offer came in that was acceptable to the seller and their bank, but then this person has the rights of the seller, which were signed away by the seller, to give them the authority to choose which offer is acceptable, but they're not going to accept an offer that's just acceptable to the lender. They want more money that they could make some money off of it. Even though they're not a licensed real estate agent, they're kind of acting like an intermediary to find a buyer. However, they get to determine which offers from what buyers are acceptable, and they'll keep the difference as their profit. Wait, isn't that what you hire a real estate agent to do, and you pay them a flat commission on that or a percentage commission on that? So this person is trying to do the job of a real estate agent without a license. But I'm trying to remember what that contract is actually called. But basically, that's all you're doing is the contract is asking somebody to sign their rights away to someone else. And that other third party now is the one that can determine which offers are acceptable or which ones are not. This is why I refer to them as wannabe investors, because the majority of them don't know what the hell they're doing, or they're greedy. And they're putting our clients risk. So if an offer comes in that was acceptable for their bank so that they could avoid a foreclosure by doing this short sale, but then it's not acceptable for this other investor, they hold out and another offer just doesn't come in, then the client just got foreclosed on. Because the offer that came in wasn't good enough for this third party who wanted to earn some money off of it. But yet they're not really financially involved in this property other than their profit. They may have put $1 down for the person to sign their rights away on the house. Okay. I forget what it's. I'll remember in a few.
I have a question. So, is the difference between an amendment and a novation? An amendment, you're changing a portion of the contract, and then a novation, you're changing the entirety of it?
No, okay, you're talking about amendments now. Amendments is changing the contract, the terms of a contract or agreement. Novation is replacing an old contract with a new one altogether.
So you're changing the whole thing, basically.
Changing the whole thing.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. All right, so here, let's do the highlights now for assignment and novation.
Got it.
Okey-dokey. Everybody got it?
Well,
Yeah, got it.
Okay, so discharge of a contract. The contract can be completely performed with all of its terms carried out, or it can be breached. That means broken if one of the parties defaults. In addition, there's various other methods by which a contract may be discharged. And these are some of the ways that the contracts can be discharged. Partial performance. That's when the parties only partially perform their legal obligations, the promises within the contract. So they didn't do everything the contract required them to do. They've only partially performed. Substantial performance, when the parties performed all the terms of the contract, but they didn't substantially perform. They didn't do everything exactly as the contract required them to. Impossibility of performance is when the terms of the contract cannot be legally accomplished for some reason. One example is they're not able to get a permit to use the property for the intended purpose, or they're unable to get a certificate of occupancy due to the condition, or some other legal condition that cannot be met. By mutual agreement, both parties mutually agree simply to cancel the contract. In that case, nobody is necessarily in breach of contract, but that's a way to discharge of a contract. Or by operation of law, like the voiding of a contract as a result of fraud, a contract with a minor, an expiration of a statute of limitations. Contracts can be, or the contracts were altered without all parties agreeing to those altered terms. Remember, anytime we change the contract, the consent of any changes, we need the consent of all the parties to initial next to all those changes. Okay, so default or breach of contract. Let's see. So default or breach of contract. Default or breach of contract is when somebody violates the terms of the contract without having a good legal excuse to do so. They could be held legally and financially liable to the other party. Here's a term we learned back on page 73 in an earlier chapter. I think it was chapter 4. An injunction is when a judge orders someone to do something or to refrain from doing something. That term is usually on the state exam. We need to know and understand what the term injunction is. It's when a judge orders somebody to do something or to refrain from doing something. Now, we're going to learn about here now, if a seller defaults, what can the buyer do? And if a buyer defaults, what can the seller do? So this is what is coming up here on these coming pages. Coming slides, whatever. Oh well. Ooh, thunder. Here comes a storm. We're supposed to have a storm today? Looks like we're gonna have one.
I heard a mix of
It's so hot.
hundreds of rain.
What?
I heard that we're in like the 100-degree range and thunderstorms possibly in some areas.
Well, I have not stuck my head out the door today, so I don't know how the temperature is. I got the AC running all day long in here. But,
Right now outside is 101 degree.
is it? Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Guess I'm glad I'm not outside today. All right, so if a seller defaults, what can the buyer do? Well, the buyer can rescind the contract. That means they could cancel the contract and recover their earnest money deposit, also known as a good faith deposit, as if the contract had never been made. The buyer can sue the seller. The lawsuit's called specific performance. They're forcing the seller to carry out the terms of the contract as they agreed to in the contract. An example of this is the seller backs out of a legally binding contract because they simply just changed their mind and don't want to sell at the last minute. The buyer could sue the seller to have a judge issue an injunction, forcing them to turn over the ownership as they agreed to in the contract. As a general rule of thumb, you could force a seller to sell. You can't force a buyer to buy. Generally speaking, who knows? There may be crazy judges out there that order specific performance suits and they issue injunctions against a buyer. But that's usually not the case, unless the buyer's an idiot. Don't worry, I'll elaborate on that one a little bit more. Let's first talk about if the seller defaults, what can the buyer do? When we get into if the buyer defaults, what can the seller do? I'll elaborate on my seller being an idiot or a moron comment. Now, the buyer can also sue for compensatory damages. That means they could force the seller to pay them money for breaching the contract, to issue them compensation. That's what compensatory damages are. Okay. Now, liquidated damages. What are liquidated damages? Liquidated damages are an amount of, it's an agreement. It's just an agreement. Liquidated damages is an agreement. Well, what is it an agreement about? It's an agreement about how much money will serve as compensation in the event that someone breaches a contract. So it's just an agreement about the amount of money that is to serve as compensation in the event one of the parties breaches the contract. Now, it doesn't say where that money's coming from, but if you do write in there, in the liquidated damage agreement, that the deposit money is to serve as compensation if one of the parties defaults, usually the buyer, no further compensation can be sought after.
Is this a requirement for every contract?
No. The book makes it sound that way, though. If you were to read the book, it sounds like it's a standard part of every contract, but it's not. I could pull up a contract. You show me where it says liquidated damage agreement. It doesn't say it anywhere in there. You could write it into a contract, but this is not standard in every contract. So liquidated damages is an agreement made in advance about how much money will serve as compensation if one of the parties, usually the buyer, defaults. Let's highlight that. And if you were to further read it, it says if a sales contract specifies that an earnest money deposit serves as liquidated damages in case of the buyer default by the buyer, the seller is entitled to keep the deposit if the buyer refuses to perform for no good reason. The seller who does choose to keep the deposit as liquidated damages may not sue for any further damages. However, if you have a liquidated damage agreement and you say you specify a dollar amount that's to serve as compensation, that dollar amount can be greater than the good faith deposit. So don't say that the money's coming from the good faith deposit, otherwise that's all you could get. You could have just a dollar amount that's to serve as damages, and then make a claim against the good faith deposit later in the event they do default. And then if that's not enough to cover the entire amount that they agreed to pay as damages, then you could chase after them for that additional money. That's the proper way to do it. A lot of people write these up in an improper way. They say, all right, liquidated damage will be $20,000, but the buyer only put down $5,000, and then they say, well, the good faith deposit will serve as damages. Well, then you can't collect any further money than that. Everybody understand that concept? Yes, no. We need a little further agreement, explanation.
Yes,
Wow.
understand.
Yes.
Yes, what? Yes, you understand? Yes, you want it explained again, or what? Hello?
Understand. Yeah.
Okey doke. All right. So now, if the buyer defaults, what can the seller do in the event that the buyer were to default? Well, if the buyer defaults, what can the seller do? Well, if there was a liquidated damage agreement added to the contract, it's not a standard thing in all contracts, the seller can declare the contract be forfeited if the contract stated they can. And if it was agreed to that they could be awarded compensation from the buyer as liquidated damages. Now, where that money comes from is a different story altogether. That's a different issue. So make sure that if you put a liquidated damage agreement in the contract, you don't also write that the deposit money will serve as compensation, because then you can't chase after anything more. If that liquidated damage agreement was agreed to, that they would pay a higher amount than whatever they gave they could have put down $1,000. You're not getting anything more than that. Now the seller could rescind the contract. Ooh, that thunder. The seller can rescind the contract as if it were never made. However, this would require them to return all the deposit money to that would-be buyer. The seller could also sue the buyer for specific performance. Wait a minute. Didn't I tell you before that generally courts won't do that? They won't, unless the buyer's a moron. What I mean by that, let's finish reading this. A seller can sue the buyer for specific performance. However, this would require them to sign over the deed to the buyer and then chase after them for the payment. So think about it for a second. The buyer defaults because they say, you know what? I changed my mind. I don't want to purchase. Okay, well, you're in breach of contract now. Okay, so what? Well, I'm going to sue you as a seller to force you to carry out the terms of the contract as agreed to buy my property. I don't want to pay your property. I don't want to take on a 30-year mortgage. I've been thinking about it, and I don't want to take on a 30-year mortgage for a house that I don't think is worth it, and it looks like it's the money pit. Ooh, high winds too, huh? And I don't think I think it's the money pit. So a buyer, the seller would have to sign over the deed to the buyer. I don't purchase your property. And then the seller's like, yeah, okay, you're named in this deed. I'm signing the deed. I'm going to hand it to you, and then you accept it. When does the transfer of ownership take place? Upon delivery and acceptance of the deed. I just signed the deed and handed it to you. You gotta pay me. So now the seller can sue the buyer successfully for specific performance. What do you think? I was just giving you my house? Right? The buyer would need to be a moron for a seller to be able to successfully sue them for specific performance. Right? So that just gave the explanation that if a buyer doesn't want to buy the property, you don't accept the deed from the seller. You're going to have to pay them for it. You'd have to be a moron to do that. That's what I mean by, generally speaking, you could force a seller to sell, but you can't force a buyer to buy and take on a 30-year mortgage for a house that they change their mind on. Generally, a judge will not do that. Could you have a judge out there that makes a wacky decision and does force that? Yeah, maybe. Because who the hell, I can't speak for all judges. But that would be a moronic thing to do, and generally judges do not do that. Force people to take on a 30-year mortgage for a house that they don't want. You'd probably be able to appeal that in court and win. And then lastly, the seller can sue for compensatory damages to get more from that buyer. That's more realistic. Okay? So let me get the title from that down. Put it in our notes. And get all this right up. Are you guys experiencing any of that extreme wind and rain that I am hearing right now? I got
Not in my area.
I got wind against my window here right next to me. I'm a couple
You
feet.
always need to get that first.
Wow. Well, I'm in Linden, so if you're south, it'll probably be heading your way after. It usually hits me here before it hits you guys. Wow. All right, got all my notes down here, as you should. So let's do these highlights. Oh, shoot, I think I got my back door open downstairs. You guys highlight these things. I gotta go check on my back door. I'll be right back. Let me pause the recording here. All right, so now we got the thunder out there too. Okay. So contracts used in the real estate business. The rest of this chapter is pretty much going to be talking about the contract. It's going to be a recap of a lot of the stuff that we've already gone over in previous chapters here. Okay. So preparation of contracts. We don't actually write contracts from scratch. We already have contracts that have been approved by attorneys and that have been written by attorneys and approved by the Real Estate Commission. So these contracts, we just need to fill in the blank lines pretty much for what's on the contract. So don't leave any blank lines, basically. We can only prepare the contracts for 1 to 4 family residences and single residential buildable lots. For commercial property, industrial property, etc. Remember, whether the contracts are for sale or lease, or if it's an option agreement, these must be prepared by attorneys. Okay, we can start the process by preparing a non-binding, a non-legally binding term sheet, also referred to as an intent to purchase or lease. We can't prepare the actual contract. Only a lawyer could do that. Now, New Jersey requirements say that contracts must indicate the business relationship with respect to the parties named in the document. And then the opinion 26 notice, well, that has to be the cover page of any contract prepared by licensees. That basically informs the consumer of their right to hire a lawyer and use a lawyer. You guys remember all that stuff, right? Oh, wait, let me see if I can pull a contract here. All right, let me see about pulling up a blank contract here to show and share with you. I'm going to have to minimize this screen for a second here in order to get to my desktop. Contracts and disclosures. New contracts, newest updated contracts and disclosures. Sales contract with opinion 26 notes. Here we go. I'm going to open that up so I'll have it and I can share it. Try. I don't know why it's not opening up. That opened up. Why is that not opening? Okay, there we go. Geez, that was weird. I don't know why that document wasn't opening up, but either way, it's open now. So here we could see the here is a sales contract with the opinion 26 notice as the cover page. So the first thing we see here is the opinion 26 notice. And then if we scroll down, right after that, we have the first page of the sales contract. You see, statewide New Jersey Realtor standard form of real estate sales contract. At the top, it says this is a legally binding contract. Will become final and binding within 3 business days. And there's a table of contents in our contract. Let's see, do we see one anywhere that says, what was it that we were looking for before? Oh, we were looking for a liquidated damage agreement before. So do you guys see anywhere here on this sales contract, a liquidated damage agreement? Anything that talks about that? Liquidated damages, or maybe money due in breach of contract? What happens in breach of contract? Let's see, maybe. Broker's information, equitable liens. Disclosure that buyer may sell may be a real estate licensee.
Would it be like entire agreement parties liable? Or no?
Now, it basically says that this contract is the entire agreement. But let's take a look at the parties liable part. We can take a look at that. But I don't think that that's it, but we'll take a look. Let's see if we can find something else over here too. Or failure or of buyer or seller to close. I guess that would be a breach of contract, right? So section 27. So we'll look at both section 27 and section 40. See, there's section numbers here, but there's also line numbers. That's very good to know in order to edit contracts. You're talking to somebody on the phone, you say, yeah, in section 1 over between line 25 and line 33, you know, it's a good way to reference a contract, know exactly what someone's talking about. That's the way attorneys would review contracts too. They would say, delete section 1 and replace it with this. Delete lines between this and this line and then replace it with this wording. That's the way attorneys do it in attorney review. So what was that section number 27, failure to buyer to close? So let me scroll down here and try to get to section 27. There you go. Failure of buyer or seller to close. If the seller fails to close title to the property in accordance with this contract, buyer then may commence any legal and equitable action to, okay, so that's between the seller and the buyer there. And if the buyer fails to close in accordance with this contract, seller can then commence an action for damages it has suffered, and in such case, the deposit money paid on account of the purchase price shall be applied against such damages. If buyer or seller breach this contract, the breaching party will nevertheless be liable to brokers for the commission in the amount set forth in this contract, as well as reasonable attorney fees, costs, and other damages determined by the court. This is fairly new. This previously wasn't in there. But I don't know if this would count as a liquidated damage agreement the way they have it worded. They do say if the buyer fails to close, that the deposit monies paid on account of the purchase price shall be applied against such damages. If that's the case, and you have a liquidated damage agreement for an amount greater than the deposit money, then all you could collect is the deposit money. Even though they tried wording it, that the price shall be applied against such damages. I don't know about that. Well, an attorney wrote it up, so hopefully they're not incompetent. You never know. I wouldn't put it past attorneys, you know. I've come across all kinds of attorneys, some that I probably know more about law than them. All right, let's see. So then we have New Jersey contract requires that the following statement be added on the top of any sale or lease contract prepared by real estate licensees that says, this is a legally binding contract. By the way, we got a if power should go out, because this seems like it's going pretty bad over here. If power should go out, then we'll be done for the day. Okay, don't even bother trying to log back in. We'll just pick up tomorrow. Okay, at this point, we got a half hour of class left. So, it says that this is a legally binding contract. Now, it says a little bit more than that. The phrase actually says this is a legally binding contract that will become final and binding within 3 business days. During this period, you could choose to consult an attorney who can review and cancel the contract. All contracts prepared by licensees must also disclose the agency relationships, and they do that in section 29. So if we were to actually look at the sales contract here, look at the table of contents, section 29, declaration of business relationships. Basically says what agents, what companies, and who they're representing, but it also has to put down your license numbers too. Let's see the wording at the top of the first page of the sales contract. Let's give you a view of it. What does it say here at the top of the first page of the sales contract? This is a legally binding contract, becomes final within the 3 business days, right? That's what they're talking about, right? Even though an exam question may just simply refer to, this is a legally binding contract. It says a little more than that, but those words are there. Oh, here, I got screenshots from this too, like from the top of a sales contract. Where's the contract required? By the way, on these slideshows, if you guys were to use them, you can see that these are actually links here to a sample sales contract and lease contract. I got links to them in the shared Google Drive. Make sure I got all the stuff in the notes. I do. Okay. Okay. So attorney review, how does attorney review exactly work? Is attorney review 3 days long? Well, it could be longer. It's just that each party has 3 days to respond to the last side's last response. So attorney review can be done in an hour. It can be done in 3 days. It can be done in 3 months. It's just when they say attorney review is 3 days, that just means that each party has 3 days to respond to the last, so that we can make sure that the ball keeps rolling. They keep communicating with each other. So attorney review, many states don't even have it. Attorneys get involved only if there's a problem with the transaction. See, this explains section 35 of the actual contracts. Okay, so section 35 is the attorney review section. And if we, here, let me see. So section 35, attorney review clause. So if we scroll down to 35, we can see it looks very similar to what we're showing here, right? The, oh, here we go. Study by the attorneys, counting of time, and notice of disapproval. Study by attorney, counting of time, notice of disapproval. You see, it's the same thing. So both parties must receive a duplicate original of the fully executed contract. Then we start counting of time to deliver the fully executed contracts to both sides' attorneys to start the review, make changes, or cancel the contract. Now, this is not actually what it says in the contract here. This is my interpretation, my explanation to you guys. If we were to read what it actually says in the contract, it says, under study by attorney, it says buyer and seller may choose to have an attorney study this contract. If an attorney is consulted, the attorney must complete their review on the contract within a 3-day period. This contract will be legally binding at the end of this 3-day period, unless an attorney for the buyer or seller reviews and disapproves the contract, and then they send their own suggested changes. And they could go back and forth like that. It's just that each side has 3 days to respond to the previous ones. Now, if they both agree, they could lengthen that 3-day period of response time, or they could halt the attorney review until the happening of a certain event, like getting approval from a court or something of that nature. So my thing here is not exactly what attorney review says, but it is an explanation of what attorney review says. So it says the counting of time, we count 3 business days. We don't count weekends or legal holidays. Review period can be extended or temporarily halted if both sides agree. To begin an attorney review, to make modifications or cancel the contract. Otherwise, it becomes legally binding as it is, and then nobody can make changes to the contract without the other side's approval. So when the attorneys study it, one attorney then can either sign it, agree to it, and now we're out of attorney review. Or they could send out their notice of disapproval of the current way that the contract is written. So one side's attorney starts the review process first by acknowledging receipt of the contract and makes proposed changes to it and proposes changes to it. So each side has 3 days to respond. And this goes back and forth until one side agrees to the final terms. We call this the meeting of the minds. Now, once both parties come to agree on the terms of the contract and sign off on them, they're now in a legally binding contract and attorney review has been concluded. That's the way that attorney review works. Okay, so. So this is the way that attorney review works. So that's the explanation. I'm going to put that in the notes of how attorney review works. And I'm just going to write explanation of how attorney review works. And then I'll have another section that I'll put in the notes of actual wording of attorney review. I'm going to say this is from an actual sales contract. I'm going to take a screenshot from this contract right here from the attorney review section. I'll use my snippet tool. And we're going to take a screenshot from section 35 here of attorney review. So those notes that I keep making used to be just a regular class links, the new class links Word document. I'm going to share with you what I'm actually been doing here while I've been teaching this class with you guys. I've been enhancing your notes. You know, all these slides or a lot of these slides, I've been taking the information like default or breach of contract, and I put down just the wording from these things. You know, maybe taking screenshots and then showing the actual explanation of how attorney review works. And the actual wording of attorney review is right here. I took that screenshot from the actual contract. Here. Screenshot from actual sales contract. And there we go. And I've been uploading it every day and updating that. It's called the new class links Word document. Okay. I've been putting the notes in there. Okay, so let's get back to it. So the federal lead paint requirement. Remember, when is the lead paint, the federal lead paint disclosure required?
For a house that has been built. If
1978.
from 1978 and before.
It's for any property built prior to 1978. The federal lead paint disclosure statement must be used. And you need to have the owner fill it out first, followed by the owner needs to fill it out first, followed by the buyer or renter, whoever you're supplying it to. And then you got to give them the lead pamphlet, the booklet on how to protect your family from lead in the home. And then you got to give them a 10-day opportunity to conduct an inspection for lead hazards or waive that inspection if they wish to close any sooner on their purchase or lease. So the contracts that we use, well, is the contracts that are prepared already for us. We just fill in the blanks. We use listing agreements. Each MLS has their own. We use exclusive buyer brokerage agreements, designated agency agreements. Transaction brokers have their own transaction brokerage agreements. Or brokerage service agreements, we call them BSAs. We also use them as well when working as agents. We also have disclosed dual agency agreements. There's a separate one for seller, buyer, landlord, and tenant. We also have the sales contract. Now, keep in mind, there's no official name for a sales contract. Some people refer to it as a sales contract. Some people call it a purchase contract. Some call it a binder and deposit receipt. It goes by many names. So don't get all high and mighty that whatever you prefer to call it, that everybody else should call it that same name, okay? You could just call it the contract. So let me put a title here. Contracts you and the business. There we go. So there's no official name for this sales contract. Look, it's known as an offer to purchase, contract of purchase and sale, earnest money agreement, binder and deposit receipts, purchase contract, sales contract, call it whatever the hell you want. There's no official name. That's what we get down to with that. So nothing really to study there, just for you to know. Okay, so how does offer and acceptance work? Let's do this highlight here. A broker lists and owns a real estate for sale at a price and conditions that are set by the owner. So one of the essential elements of a valid sales contract is a meeting of the minds, whereby the buyer and seller agree on the terms of the sale. And this is usually accomplished through the process of offer and acceptance. And in the coming slides, we're going to be going over how that process actually works. All right, so let's do these highlights. We're just going to do the highlights first, and then we're going to get to a page where I just wrote everything out, clear and concise, a little bit clearer and more direct than the book. But let's still highlight all these things in the book and write these notes here as I have written them. Let me know when you get all those notes down.
Okay, I'm good.
Not yet. Hold on.
Okay.
All right, I'm good.
All right. So offer and acceptance works like this. One of the essential elements, so this is my interpretation, my wording of it, the way I would have, if I wrote the book, how I would have written it in there. One of the essential elements of a valid contract is a meeting of the minds. That's where the parties to the contract are aware and in agreement of all the terms of the contract. This is done by the process of offer and acceptance. So I should probably do this too. And bold. So how it works is first the seller lists their property for sale at a certain agreed upon price. Now, how do they come upon that agreed upon price? We helped guide them there by doing a CMA with them, right? And we did that presentation and hopefully they priced the property properly. Now, a buyer makes an offer at a full listing price or perhaps another amount. Maybe they make another offer through their broker, which then presents it this or sends it over to us and we present it or forward it to the seller within 24 hours. Then the seller either accepts the offer, rejects it, or they make another counter offer, which is basically a rejection of that buyer's initial offer. So at this point, the buyer's free to walk away if that were to happen. Now, if the seller makes a counter offer, the buyer could either accept it, reject it, or make their own counter offer back. They could go back and forth like this until one of the parties agrees to the other's terms. When they do, this is called a meeting of the minds, and the offer is accepted pending attorney review. It's still not a legally binding contract until attorney review is concluded, or 3 business days pass. If they're not doing attorney review, that contract would become legally binding as it is. Now, in contract negotiations, when is an offer considered accepted? And the answer to that is when the last person who made an offer has simply been notified or their agent has been notified that their offer has been accepted. Remember, anything told to your agent, they have a fiduciary duty to report it to you. So if it was told to the agent, it's as if it was told to the property owner. So this can be done verbally. However, it's always suggested to follow in the good practice to follow up and get it in writing. But technically, you're not required to in order for the offer to be considered accepted. Let me actually change the wording there to actually reflect that. And writing, but technically not required to in order for the offer to be considered accepted. Yep. And that's under offer and acceptance. I get those notes changed and updated there. It's important to know that little detail to get a question right on exam. Hint, 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 hint. An exam question sooner than later. Hint, 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 hint. Okay, y'all maybe get a screenshot of this one.
Got it.
All right. So let's just copy this, and I'm going to give once again a better explanation on the coming page. Let me know when you got that, and then I'll change the page where you'll get more highlights.
I'm good.
There we go. And here we got more highlights on page 218. And to write a little note, liquidated damage agreement, not standard in all contracts. Everybody got that?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so earnest money deposits. You may want to snap a picture of this one. This one's a decent explanation. Earnest money deposit is sometimes referred to as a good faith deposit. It's money. Let me do some technical corrections on this. It's money. It is money the buyer puts down when they make an offer. It shows the buyer is operating in good faith and plans to complete the transaction. An offer still valid even if made without any good faith deposit, which is customarily at least $1,000. The buyer is asking the seller to take their property off the market, and so they want to make sure the deposit is large enough to show they are serious with their intentions. If the seller rejects the offer, the earnest money deposit is immediately returned to the would-be buyer. If the offer is accepted, the money will be credited towards the buyer's purchase price. If the buyer breaches the contract, the seller could make a claim to keep it. Both parties would have to agree to that, and if they don't, only a judge could decide who gets the money. So the brokers cannot release those funds basically from the escrow account. Remember, they can only do that if both parties agree to and order us to release those funds. Not just one of them. They both got to agree to it. They don't both agree to the broker releasing the funds from the escrow account. Only a judge can determine, could order that. So if there was a liquidated damage agreement added to a contract which specified the earnest money would serve as damages, then they could just take it. Brokers must deposit any money given by our clients into an escrow or trust account, used only for keeping clients' money for short periods of time. It must be deposited within 5 business days from the time the client gave their agent the money, not the time the offer is accepted, not from the time that the offer is accepted. Any cash deposit of $10,000 or more must be reported to the IRS, and brokers are required to keep escrow records for 6 years. That's good. Let me take that corrected right up and add that into the notes as well. Okay, a meeting of the minds is when all the parties are in agreement on all of the terms and details of the contracts. The school exam focuses more on the financial aspects for its definition. So when the parties are in agreement on price, down payment, and financing method, that's the definition you'll need to know for the school exam. It more focuses on the money. A kickback is giving anything of value to an unlicensed person. An example is giving a friend money or a gift in exchange for a lead, including rebates to a seller, because sellers cannot legally get rebates in New Jersey. Only buyers of a primary residence can receive rebates legally. Therefore, it's not a kickback. Closing gifts to buyers, they should be limited in value, so it is in no way perceived as a kickback. I threw 25 bucks in there, but you know what? Just make sure it's not crazy high amount of money, okay? Here are the parts of a sales contract that are essential to be included. These are the essential elements to be included in a valid real estate sales contract. You have to have a contract in writing. You have to have competent party, an agreement to buy and sell. So offer and acceptance. All right, there, let's even write that in there. We'll call that offer and acceptance. Okay. Liquid description of the property. Consideration, that's the full purchase price, either legal tender, exchange of value, or love and affection if it's a gift. Grantor's agreement to convey. The place and time of closing should be stated, and it must be signed by all parties involved. Those are the essential elements that must be included in any contract. Now, what are the non-essential elements? Well, these items are often included in our contracts, but they're not required by law because some items may not apply to your situation. Now, out of the contracts, they tend to be universal for all to 1 to 4 families, so they include things that may not apply to certain situations, but either way, they're included in contracts. But if you were like a private individual and you created your own contracts, these are still the items that must be included, or these are the ones that are optional. Encumbrances to which the deed will be made subject to. Well, these have encumbrances, so therefore that's not an essential element to be included. You follow? So earnest money deposit, is it required that when you make an offer that it's accompanied by a good faith or earnest money deposit?
Good faith.
The answer is no. You know, although it's customary that it's at least $1,000. I mean, actually, what does it do? You're asking them to take their property off the market, that you're serious with your intentions. Mortgage financing, the buyer plans to obtain. Well, what if they're buying cash? That's why that's an optional one. It's not essential. Possession by the buyer. What date the buyer is going to get possession? The title evidence, the form of title evidence that was used. Prorations or adjustments. What happens in the event of destruction of the premises? Now, these things, we have all of these things in our contract, but these are not essential elements in order for the contract to be valid. Maybe a clause that says what happens in the event of default by either party. Or a provision for a final walkthrough on the day of close. A contingency. Well, contingencies are happenings in which a contract is dependent upon. They usually begin with the word subject to. This contract is subject to me qualifying to get the mortgage loan. You know? And the signature of a witness is not an essential element. We're usually the witness that's signing that contract in witness of the signature of our clients. Other contract contingencies that can be made part to the contract. So let's call that other contract contingencies. FHA and VA loan may have a contingency, an addendum that needs to be added. Or we call it addendas. Addenda. Call it addendum, an addendum to the contract, or an addenda. You know, call it addendum. Addendums, addenda. Ken does. Yeah, there you go. If it's subject to an engineering report, an engineer's report, or an escape clause. Ooh, what is an escape clause? That sounds juicy, huh? Anyone know? An escape clause is if a seller says, I'm sorry, if a buyer makes an offer on your property, you have a listing, you're selling your property, a buyer makes an offer on the property, but they say, hey, listen, I have a house I need to sell first. So I'm going to make this this purchase offer on your property subject to the sale of my current home. Because I can't go through with your purchase until I sell mine. I can't make the mortgage payment on two houses. So the seller could say, okay, this is what we'll do. We'll accept your offer. However, you're going to have to put an escape clause in that contract. An escape clause allows the seller to escape the contract and not be in breach of contract, and allows the seller to continue marketing the property and showing it. And in the event they get a buyer that makes an offer that's acceptable to them, they could go back to the current buyer and ask them if they're ready to remove that as a contingency to sell their home. If not, we're going to kill the deal with you so that we could accept the other offer that came in, and they won't be considered in breach of contract. That's what an escape clause, also known as a breakout or kickout clause, is often referred to as. Liquidated damages agreements, short sales, subject to family member approvals, subject to zoning or building permit approvals. These are other contingencies that may be added into contracts. So let's do some highlights and let's make some notes here. That escape, kickout, or knockout clause protects the seller. And let's highlight here what an escape clause is. We'll, next to contingencies, write subject to in quotes like that. And the FHA and VA loans have a special clause that must be legally added into all sales contracts that says that the contract can be canceled and the buyer can get out of the contract without penalty if the property does not appraise for the purchase price. So let's just do those note highlights right now.
And got it.
All right. Everybody good?
Got it.
So contingencies are happening in which the contract is dependent on, so or subject to. So if those terms are not met, they can get out of the contract without being considered in breach of contract. Agents should address and remove contingencies as soon as possible, ASAP. So we have the appraisal. The FHA loan or VA loan requires special contingency clause. What is the purpose of the special contingency clause that must be added to all sales contracts when these type of financing is being used? That's an exam question. It says that if the he does not appraise for the purchase price, the buyer can get out of the contract without penalty. Subject to a home inspection. By the way, you should submit offers as contingency-free as possible. However, you still need to look out for your buyer client's best interest when making offers. And if it's necessary, you need to add certain contingencies to look out for them so that they can't be considered in breach of contract under certain circumstances. But really, what makes your offer better is an offer that has less contingencies to it. Contingent on you getting a mortgage loan, contingent upon family members helping with the money for the down payment, giving their approval.
Can, anyone get out of the contract after the 3-day attorney period is done?
Yeah, we could already be out of attorney review if these contingencies were included in the contract. A contingency is a happening in which the contract is dependent on. These are ways that you could get out of the contract and not be considered in breach of contract. So you're in a legally binding contract now, but if any of these things occur, for any of these reasons, are ways that you could get out of the contract still and not be considered in breach.
Oh, okay.
That escape, kick out, or knockout clause contingency. An expiration of a buyer's lease. You can have the purchase contingent upon my lease expiring because the landlord won't let me out of my lease early. Provided that it's not 9 months from now, Come on, you gotta be realistic. A use permit, contingency on a use permit to get the zoning. Because I want to build a 2-family house here, one family. This is very common in commercial real estate, but we don't prepare the contracts in commercial real estate, where the purchase is subject to them getting the financing and all the approvals and environmental approvals in order to build something that they want. They may need to get approvals from city council in town because it's a big construction project or something. Or a building permit for construction, or subject to third-party approval with short sales, bankruptcies, or estate sales. Liquidated damage agreement, we already went over that. I just got it here again because they're mentioning it again here in the book, so I put that slide up again. It says page 200. New Jersey has a plain language requirement. It's like a little blurb in this book. It used to be a whole page on the book, but as you could see, for obvious reasons, why they barely even mention it anymore. New Jersey does have a plain language requirements for all of our sales contracts that say that contracts must use words common in the everyday English language that don't have a separate legalese meaning to them. Because there's some words in the English language that also, in the eyes of the law, have a separate legal meaning to them. So we have to use plain language with words that don't have separate legal meanings. They got to be easy to understand by anybody. However, this requirement only applies to properties valued under $50,000. All right. Yeah. Not a whole lot. Okay. And then there has to be a rescission period for certain types of properties, right? What is a rescission? The right to cancel a contract within a given period of time. And there's rescission periods for new construction. Those new construction rates of rescission are for 7 days for out-of-state properties marketed to New Jersey residents, 7 days for new construction in large in-state subdivisions, you have a 3-day rescission, 7 days for new construction for large in-state subdivisions with 100 lots, but not less than 10. If there's common area elements involved, like with condominiums and cooperatives. There's a 5-day new construction right of rescission for off-site, the discovery of off-site conditions. And there's a 3-day rescission period for both new construction, and resale properties, resale/existing properties. That's for the attorney review period. Resale is just a used property. It's not brandy new. Okay. Nope. And then there's that 3-day rescission period for we get that 3-day rescission period for mortgage loans and financing. Well, I don't want to redo this. Yikes. Nope. There's no right of rescission whatsoever for purchase money mortgages. Those are any loans used to buy real estate. If you read it backwards, mortgage money to purchase. That's what a purchase money mortgage is. All right, let's do the highlights here now for that rescission of contract and the purchase money mortgages and refinancing and yada, yada, yada. Everybody got that?
Got it.
Okay, we're almost done with this. I know we're over time right now, but we're almost done with this, so just hang in there for a couple more minutes. Okay, option agreements, that they must be prepared by attorneys. So let's just, option agreements in New Jersey, they should be prepared by attorneys. I know it says should, but they must. Option agreements must be prepared by attorneys. Okay, everybody got that? So land contracts, let's highlight this about land contracts. This is something new. We did not previously have this. Just do the highlights. The next slide will explain them better.
Yeah, it's done.
Okay, everybody got that?
Yeah.
All right, so land contracts, not to be confused with a ground lease, which we're going to be going over in the next chapter when we talk about renting and leasing. That's what chapter 12 is all about. Land contract is a type of seller financing, also referred to as an installment sales contract. This is where a buyer makes payments in installments and waits for the deed. It's kind of like a lease to own. The owner doesn't actually turn over the deed, however, to the buyer until the full purchase price or another amount that they agree upon has been paid. So that's a little bit different than your typical seller financing. In a typical seller financing, it works the same way as you do when you get financing from the bank. You know, you sign the contracts, you close you close on the deal, the seller signs over the deed to the buyer, and you're the owner and you make mortgage payments. In this case, with seller financing, you'd be making mortgage payments to the seller. However, in an installment sales contract, a land contract, you're making payments in installments, and the seller doesn't actually turn over the deed to the buyer until they paid off the full amount owed or some other agreed upon amount, at which time, once they paid that amount, they'll get they'll get a loan from a bank and pay the seller off in full for the balance. Okay. Now, until the buyer pays off the full amount, they don't actually get ownership. However, they do have a financial interest in the property through those periodic payments that they've been making, building up equity towards the ownership. This is called equitable title. So even though they don't yet own the real estate, they do have a financial interest towards the ownership. So if the buyer fails to continue making payments, the seller doesn't need to go through the hassle of the long, drawn-out, expensive process of foreclosure because the buyer doesn't own the property. However, it is harder to get them out than a simple renter through eviction. You can't just evict them either. It's more than the buyer is more than a simple renter when they're renting to own, because they made payments towards the equity. So it's harder to get them out than a normal renter, but it's easier to get them out than having to go through the hassle of foreclosure. Okay, so equitable title is rooted in the word equity. And equity is the difference between the market value of a property and what is owed on it. It's the built-in value. And there's three typical ways of building equity. Equity can be built up by paying down the debt, what you owe on the property, increasing the difference between the market value and what you owe. Or by the market value is just fluctuating. The market value is rising. Well, that will build more equity in the property. Or by doing improvements. This would force an increase in the equity by increasing the value of the property and what you owe on it. Okay. So when you're preparing a sales contract, you're going to need to have a couple of windows open on your computer. The New Jersey contract form system, you can use either my link, njrforms.com, for the New Jersey Realtor contract form system, or this forwards to njrealtor.com/zipforms. Either one you go to, it takes you there. You can open the tax records for the property using the MLS tax records search. You can print the MLS listing of the property, or keep it open on another screen because you're going to have to get information from the listing and put it in the contract and go back and forth. You're going to need to gather the license numbers of all the agents and their brokerages, as well as the address of the brokerages. You could get that from the New Jersey Real Estate Commission's licensee database search page. So I have two domain names I bought that I point there, njreclicense.com or njrealestatelicensesearch.com. You can also use the New Jersey Realtors license search link. However, it doesn't have the addresses or other information, like it just has the license number. It doesn't have the addresses or brokerage information. The pre-qualification or pre-approval letter you should have from the buyer's lender, or if it's a cash purchase, you're going to need that proof of funds letter handy to submit along with the contract. A buyer's deposit check will be needed. How much will be dependent on what kind of loan they're getting. The lender will say on their pre-approval or pre-qualification letter how much money that they're going to need as a deposit, as a down payment. They can only make part of that right now when you're preparing the contract. Remember, the contract is good even if there is no good faith deposit. But the lenders require, when you're getting a loan, the buyer is going to need to put down so much money. We're going to need to know that information still so that we can write it in the contract how much money the buyer is going to need to put down. And then we're going to need to know when they're going to put it down. When are you going to have the cash that you could give to us? If the property was built prior to 1978, we're going to need that lead paint addendum statement so that the buyers can now sign it. Same thing with the seller's property condition disclosure, so we could review it and then sign it. The buyer and seller's attorney's information, we're going to need to get that if you don't have it right now, because once we're notified the offer is accepted, within 3 days, we got to get that offer over to the attorneys. The mortgage commitment letter needs to be produced within 30 days if they're getting a loan. So within 30 days of their completion of attorney review. Make sure it lands on a business day. And the closing date, which is typically 60 calendar days. Once again, make sure it lands on a business day. And if that lands at the beginning of a month, try to push it forward a couple of days so it lands at the end of the previous month. Because lenders will tend to prioritize those transactions to get them closed, to get them on their books. Okay, those are just some tips I got there for you.
Like what exactly? Like you said.
Yeah, this is the information you're gonna need to gather to prepare a contract.
What about the end of the month, like the mortgage? We should.
So when you're putting the dates in the contract, typically we put, hey, we're gonna want this closing to occur 60 days. I mean, you could close a contract that's possible within 30 days, but that's really, really pressing it. Everybody needs to be on their game. The buyer needs to produce any additional documents their mortgage lender is going to need from them. Like the attorneys, everybody's got to be on the game. There's got to be no delays with anything. Otherwise, it's very tough to close. It's a tight timeline to close in 30 days. It is possible, but it's a very tight timeline. 45 days is a little bit more relaxed, but just give it 60 days. Then you don't got to rush anything. Okay. So you do got a little leeway there. So if 60 days from the day you're writing this contract lands at the beginning of a month, push it forward a couple days to land at the end of a month, because then those lenders are going to want to push that contract through. They're going to have a little more flexibility on closing that loan.
So it can become like 70 days or something. Like
No. You push it forward to close sooner the previous month. So it's like maybe 55 days.
Okay.
Okay. So you're pushing it forward a few days to the end of the previous month.
Okay.
Or is that pushing it back? Yeah, we'll write pushing it back a few days to the end of the previous month.
Okay.
Oh. That'll just happen. Few days to the end of the previous month. Okay.
Yes.
Now, sales contracts never leave a blank line on a contract. If something is not needed, write not applicable, or put a line through the entire section and then have everybody initial next to it. Contracts must state the amount of the down payment the buyer's making, as well as as the good faith deposit amount. Customarily, at least $1,000. However, it's not mandatory. But if you want to make your offer seem better, you'll include it. The mortgage payment minimum will be dependent on the type of loan they're getting. Conventional loans typically require 20% down payment, but it could be more, it could be less. We don't know. We got to take it from whatever the lender says on that pre-qualification or pre-approval letter. FHA loans have a minimum 3.5% down payment requirement. However, the buyer could be making a larger down payment requirement. I don't know. Same thing with VA. VA doesn't require any down payment for the veteran. It's 100% financing. However, the lender may still require some kind of a down payment, but they usually don't. The VA guarantees 25% of that loan amount, so it's as if the buyer was putting down 25%. Concession is anything that one party gives up to another. So a seller's concession is money given to the buyer to help pay for the closing costs and or repairs. However, there are maximum seller concessions that are allowed by law. For FHA and VA loans, that's 6% of the loan amount, not the purchase price. For conventional loans, that's 3% of the loan amount, not the purchase price. And closing costs are guesstimated, like that word, guesstimated, to be around 2 to 3% of the purchase price. Okay. Let's see what else we got. Let's see, seller's concession is here's how to add some of the common clauses into a contract, although your brokers will probably have their own clauses or write-ups and maybe suggested ways that they prefer their own wording to use. These are just some suggestions. You don't have to use them this way. To ask for a seller's concession, you could just write into the contract, buyers requesting a seller concession up to 3% towards the buyer's closing cost and prepaid. That's prepaid interest on the loan. This is a concession and not a loan. If it's a short sale, I have a whole page long thing that I put on for short sales, but you could just write, this is a short sale, purchase price and commission subject to third-party approval. And then only if the buyer specifies only if the seller specifies that they're not going to be responsible for getting the CO or fire because they don't want to, they're gonna insisting upon that, well then only in that case would we actually write into the contract, buyer's responsible for obtaining CO and fire certificates and doing whatever's required for those to pass those inspections. The buyer's home sale contingency clause, if not just typing it in the contract, you could actually, there's actually a form here. I'm going to write, here is a form for that. Here we go. Here is a form. Here's a form, if not just typing it in the contract. And so basically you could click on this and I'll take you there. You could write in to the contract something like this. Purchase subject to the sale of the buyer's current home at 666 Mockingbird Lane, Woodbridge, New Jersey, which is currently under contract with an anticipated closing date of whatever. Yeah, you would really want to put all that information in there so that the seller gets an idea, hey, is this property even on the market yet? Is it under contract? When's it supposed to close? You know, before you're asking us to accept your offer contingent upon the sale of your current property. Well, what's the status of your current property? Right? Or if it's subject to relatives' approval, you could write something like purchase subject to buyer's relatives and then naming them, viewing the home and approving of purchase. They will be contributing money towards the purchase price. But it's a good idea to try to get all the buyers through the house and not have to put this in there. This is a needless contingency that you should not have to put in there. Get the buyers through the house first. And that's for chapter 11. Let's do the key terms to review, and we're done for the day. There's 2 key terms to review. So, you guys ready? Ready, Freddie?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. You guys are okay with a little bit here, right? You're
Yes.
freaking out of me yet? Okay, I know it's Friday and we're staying late.
Yes, it's fine. Yeah.
Contract that has been fulfilled or one that has not been signed, depending on the contract. So a contract that has been fulfilled or one that has been signed, depending on the contract. What do we call a signed contract?
Executed contract?
There you go. 12 is A. See, a lot of times you could just ask yourself a question about the question and the answer will pop up in your head. You don't need to look at this long list. Buyer's deposit with the purchase contract. What do we call that buyer's deposit with a purchase contract? Try to think of it without even looking at the list.
Earnest money?
Yeah, it's an earnest money or good faith deposit. Yeah, 9 is B. Contract with a promise by each party. What do we call it when both parties are required to do something? What kind of contract is that? I didn't get that. What'd you say?
Bilateral.
It's a bilateral contract. By meaning two, both parties. 2 is C. Contract set down in so many words. What do we call a contract that's set down in so many words? I can't explain it in a different way, otherwise I'm going to give it away.
Contract?
A what?
Express contract?
Yes, it's an express contract. You express yourself in words. 13 is D. A transfer of interest in a contract to a third party. Transfer of interest in a contract to a third party. Like if you're subleasing, as an example. What do you call it?
Bilateral?
Implied contract. No.
It's an assignment. You're assigned your duties of the contract to someone else to take over. So 1 is E. 1 is E. Those legally qualified to enter into contracts. What do we call somebody who's of sound mind and legal age?
They're
not high or drunk.
Competent party.
Competent.
Or protection for seller when the buyer is not a house to sell.
competent.
Protection for the seller when the buyer has another house to sell.
Escape clause?
It's called the escape clause or kick out, knockout. Correct. 11 is G. Something of value given in exchange.
Contingency?
Consideration.
Consideration. 5 is a violation of contract.
Breach of contract.
We're now in breach of contract. 3 is I. Interest acquired by a buyer with a land contract. What
Land contract.
what do we call that financial interest one has with a land contract?
Implied contract.
A financial interest that someone has in a land contract. Remember, a land contract is a type of seller financing. So what do we call that financial interest when they're leasing to own? Called equitable title. Equitable title. 10 is J. Contracts.
Please, Mama. You say, here.
All the terms
A
of
little bit.
have not yet been fully
Yeah. Here, little bit. Yeah.
What about a contract that's still in progress? All of it have not been. It's called executor. 13 is K. Offer returned to the offer with changes by the offeree.
Counter offer.
A counter offer. 8 is L. Contract not put into words, but shown by one's actions rather than their words.
Implied.
It is. 15 is M, an implied contract. Certain happening in which a contract is dependent upon.
Contingency.
It is. 6 is N. Agreement between two parties to perform some legal act.
Contract.
Contract.
Contract. 7 is O. And an agreement in which a buyer makes payment in installment and waits for the payment,
Land contract.
which is also referred to as an installment sales contract. 16 is P. Correct. Okay, key terms 2. A return to the status quo, which means returning to the way you started. So if you make an offer and you return to the way you started, how did that work? You rescind your offer.
Rescission.
It's rescission. Yeah. So 6 is A. Another name for an option contract. Another name for an option contract. That one-sided agreement. What do you call it?
Get option.
It's a unilateral contract. 12 is B. A law requiring certain contracts be in writing. A law requiring that contract be in writing.
Statute of frauds.
Statute of frauds. 8 is C. A contract that is binding, but one party may disaffirm it.
Offer and acceptance.
What do we call the type of contract? A contract where one party, a situation where one party can disaffirm it, maybe because they're not of legal age.
Voidable.
Voidable. 15 is D. Some agreed on to serve as damages in the event of future default, in the case of future default. What do we call a sum agreed upon in advance to serve as damages in case somebody defaults on a contract?
Unenforceable contract.
The sum. The sum is dealing with money. Sum.
Liquidated damages.
Damages. One is E. One is E. Liquidated damages. The process of reaching a meeting of the minds is also known as
Offer and acceptance.
offer and acceptance. Substitution of a new contract for an existing one. They kind of worded that backwards. Let me word it a different way. Substituting an old contract with a new one. Or substituting an existing contract with a new one.
Innovation. Innovation.
Innovation. 2 is G. A contract that meets all the legal requirements.
Valid contract.
It's valid. 13 is H. Time within which one is allowed to assert their legal rights. what do we call that? Time limit. In which,
Time is of the essence.
Essence.
I'm sorry?
Time is of the essence.
Nope. It's the same thing.
Statute of limitation.
Yes, statute of limitations. It's the same thing for police. Police can press charges against you for certain kinds of offenses if the statute of limitations have run, right? So 9 is I. A court action usually asking that the seller be forced to sell as agreed. A court action usually asking the seller be forced to sell as agreed.
Specific performance.
Yes, 7 is J, specific performance. A convention that a written contract overrides those verbal agreements, those spoken promises.
A void contract.
No, a convention that written contracts override spoken promises or agreements. What law, convention, law, that a written contract, the judge will throw a verbal agreement in favor of one that's in writing?
Parole evidence rule.
Yes, because you have evidence. You got it in writing. It's the evidence rule, 5K. A contract that does not meet all the legal requirements.
Unenforceable contract.
It does not have all the legal requirements. It's
Void contract.
yeah, it's void. 14 is L. You snuck it in there last second. Seemingly valid contract, but neither party can sue to force performance.
Unenforceable contract.
There you go. Let them unenforceable. A contract binding one party, but the other party's free to act or not.
Option.
That's describing an option. 4 is N. And contract clause requiring punctual performance because it's very, very important.
Time is of the
Time is
Time is of the essence.
correct. So 10 is O. Time is of the essence. All right, and that concludes chapter 11, which is a big chapter and a lot of questions coming from exam on that chapter. So make sure you study those notes.